grip of
Peanut butter contest. Today is March 27th, and we have the students from 3rd grade by the table beginning their recipe that they designed to be used as an entrance for the peanut butter contest. There's Lauren Fisher, and now Seth Cabot is making his recipe, and David Knapp is looking on. And it seems like he's doing an awful lot of stirring there. I don't know what Seth's recipe consists of, but I'm certain there's probably some. Of course, peanut butter, raisins, right here is a picture of Seth's creation. It looks like carrots with peanut butter and carrots again. And the second one is a happy face with a piece of pita bread, marshmallows, and an apple slice.
And that's Lauren's.
That's Lauren Fisher's. Looks pretty good to me. Now it looks like the 7th grade is going to be making their recipes. We have Laura Tam, Josh Mullen, and Aaron Cabot. Now Laura Tam is making her creation. It's called puppy chop with peanut butter. She has cereal in there, and she's mixing with the peanut butter mixture. And it looks like a pretty large amount to stir. I think she's used rice Kexx as her cereal ingredient. We'll just watch her stir for now.
You stir until all the Crispix are pretty well covered with the chocolate and peanut butter. And when they're mostly covered, you put some into a bag.
And now we have Josh Mullen making his recipe. And now we have Aaron Cabot.
Up iron, spray so that when you take out the waffles, they come out without you having to do them out.
He's making peanut
Plug
butter
the oven in
chocolate.
and close the oven so it can heat up before you put anything in. And then you take a tablespoon of baking powder, baking powder,
This idea has been brought to us by Mrs. Colbeck. And she originated it, and the students had a good time during the last full month of March, making all their ingredients, bringing them to class, making the recipe for the class, and the class enjoying it.
Then you take half cup of milk and one separated egg, then mix those two together. You take 1/4 teaspoon. One half cup flour. Then you mix it all together and make sure it gets real soft and real smooth, but it can't be too bumpy, otherwise the waffles will be real hard.
Looks like you're adding an awful lot of sugar to that recipe. It's pretty good at stirring, trying to get the consistency that he wants. Like his waffle maker is getting hot, ready to pour the batter into.
Then when your waffle is
There he
ready, pour
goes.
it into the waffle.
It's going to be ready soon.
I think we'll move it over to the side table.
Yeah.
Well, this is the finished product. Baked peanut butter waffles by Aaron Babbitt, grade 7. I'm going to record what the finished product looks like. This one here is Lauren Tams, grade 7. With the powdered sugar mix on with the cereal and mix with peanut butter. This is the pita bread. I think this is done by Josh Mullen. The carrot strip again is Seth Babbitt. Some more Lawrence. And the other two we'll have to identify a little later on.
and it says WMTA. This is the Wisconsin Music Teachers Association who sponsors these auditions. And there are 17 districts in the state. We are in the Appleton district, and in order for students to participate in these auditions, the teacher must be a member of the organization. And so I'm a member of the Wisconsin Music Teachers Association, so therefore these students can participate. So, Stephanie, here is your flag. It has the name of the student on it with the date. And Seth will get his flag next year. And Anna, for you.
Be formally reprimanded, and that record of that reprimand be placed in their permanent files.
We feel that unknowingly and unwittingly these people did help to cause this black mark against our public school, and which we're very proud of. And that is why the reprimand is going in their file.
The teachers also had no comment today, but they told the board they were sorry. The board in turn apologized to the public, saying they hope now they can get on with educating. Lisa Kruger, Action 2 News, Brilliant.
Now, it didn't take very long for Brilliant High School students to express their feelings on today's school board action. They rallied outside the school to show support for their teachers. The rally came just hours after several of the teachers apologized to the students. They were sorry, they said, for causing any embarrassment over alleged illegal gun purchases.
Pete Kittle told us this morning from his own words that what he said, they told him it was perfectly legal, so he's just like a victim of circumstance, I feel.
One student says the teachers' alleged involvement in the illegal gun buys didn't affect their actions in the classroom. Well, as you might imagine, there are strong opinions in the town of Brilliant about the school board's action today.
But as one resident put it to us, to Action 2 News, in a small town, you watch what you say. As our team coverage continues tonight, Mark Horner joins us live from Brilliant. Mark, a lot of residents apparently keeping tight-lipped about the decision to suspend Conup and reprimand the other teachers.
They are, Mary. We know that Kenneth Conup is very popular here. We also know that getting people to talk about this story down there in Brilliant isn't very easy.
It seems everyone in Brilliant is talking about Kenneth Conup, who lives right next door to gun dealer Glenn Mott. Should Conup have been suspended without pay? Should 9 teachers have been reprimanded? When we ask those questions, many residents are tight-lipped.
Do you have an opinion on that?
No. Let me out of that.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not you agree with the school board's decision? No comment?
No, thanks. I work for the newspaper.
No comment?
Nope.
I really don't want to talk about it, really. I'd rather not comment.
Okay, thank you. Familiar response today. Still, we were able to find some people who would comment about the school board's decision.
I'm sure they thought it over very carefully, and if that's what they came up with, I would agree, yeah.
Several people agree that Conup and the teachers got what they deserve.
I think they should have known better than to do something like that.
I feel if our children did something like that, they'd be reprimanded right away. These people are old enough to know better, and if they've done wrong, they should be punished.
Again, though, many people told us they simply had no comment, and it seemed to me, I detected that some of those people anyway really disagreed with the school board's decision today. Mary?
All right, thank you, Mark Horner, for that live update from Brilliant tonight. And one final point this evening on our team coverage. The Brilliant School Board wants to give the parents an opportunity to hear a little bit more about the reprimands that were handed down today against the teachers. So next Monday, May 15th, the Brilliant School Board will explain the process that it took today. Parents are encouraged to attend 5:15 Monday meeting in the Brilliant Middle School gymnasium. Well, it was...
Morning, boys and girls. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Win Reamer, and as you probably know, Aaron is my grandson as well as Seth. And I've lived in Brilliant all my life, practically, except for the time that I was in the service and when I went to college, and then after I took a job after college for a couple of months. But I'm glad to see so many of you here, and I hope that what I have to tell you is going to be interesting, and that I know you've maybe touched a little bit on what wars are about and probably what happened in the Holocaust and World War II and some of the other things. But maybe you get a little better understanding of what this was all about after I've talked to you. Now, my experiences are maybe just a little different than someone else's, but as a prisoner of war, we all had the same general thing happen to us. We were all captured, we were all held prisoner. Some of us were prisoners longer than others. I was a prisoner for 9 months, from August 6th of 1944 to May 2nd of 1945. And our purpose in getting over to Germany was, of course, to rescue the people that had been invaded and imprisoned by the Third Reich, or Germany. And the man who was in charge of the whole German country was a man by the name of Adolf Hitler. And you've probably heard of his name mentioned. Maybe you've seen some of the things on TV this last week when they talked about VE Day and when the war ended in Europe. And maybe you saw his picture somewhere else along the way. He was a real ugly person. That would be a real kind way to describe him. He was very brutal, and he wanted to impose his will on everybody else. He talked about Germany being a superpower. He wanted to have a special race that was different than, it was better than anybody else. And anybody that got in his way, he killed. He imprisoned, or he tortured them, and he did everything else. And you probably have seen some of the scenes from the Holocaust, where these people were put in concentration camps. And they, actually, they were still tortured in there. They were made to work. And when they couldn't work anymore, then they were killed. And some of the ways that they killed people were very, very inhumane. They put them in ovens. They burned their bodies, and they saved the gold from their teeth. And they put them to all kinds of torture, and then they buried. Some of them they never did get to bury. Then when the Allies came to rescue them, they made mass graves, and they just pushed them all into these big graves with bulldozers. But some of the things that he did were just horrendous. You can't really believe that one man could, or one person could do this to another. It was not just Adolf Hitler, but it was all the people that he had talked into this scheme. The German people basically were still good, hard-working Christian people, but he managed to get to the young people especially, and he got them on his side, and he gave them these liberties to go out and shoot people, to abuse people, and that's what happened to the whole country. They invaded Poland, they invaded all these neighboring countries, and they took them all over and made them prisoners, so to speak. Our job, of course, was to go over there, and I was in the Air Force, and of course we bombed them. And you probably saw pictures of the bombing missions that we made, as well as the destruction. I just happened to think of a comparison the other day when this terrible thing happened down in Oklahoma City. They said there were over 4,000 pounds of explosives used. Well, just to give you an idea of how much explosive we used, every time we went over one airplane, we had 6,000 pounds of bombs on our airplane. So we did a lot of damage. If you would have been there after the war, some cities were absolutely level. There wasn't one building left standing. But that was necessary in order to get this man to his knees and to defeat the German people and to rescue the ones that were in prison. I was drafted into the Army when I was 20 years old in 1943. And I went, my first place where I was sent for basic training was in Florida. And this was the first time that I'd really been away from home. I was very lonesome, homesick, whatever you want to call it. I'd probably never been any further away from home than Chicago. But I took my basic training in St. Petersburg, Florida. Was there for 13 weeks, and then they shipped me or sent me to California. A good way to cross the United States, and it didn't cost me anything. When I was in California, I went to radio school, and at that same time, I was transferred into the Air Corps. I took a test, and as a result, I got into the Air Force. Then from California, I went to Salt Lake City, Utah for more training, and then I finally joined my crew. A crew After a while, when you have a chance, you can see a picture of him on that small plaque over there. A crew of 10 members we were, and we were from all over the United States. People from Washington, from Pennsylvania, from New York, from Kentucky, and of course myself from Wisconsin. We had 4 officers on our crew. There was a pilot, a co-pilot, bombardier, and a navigator. And they sat up in the front part of the ship. That is up in this area. Bombardier, navigator down here, the pilot and co-pilot up there. Then there were 6 enlisted men, or people who were not officers. I was one of those. They were the tail gunner, who was at a position back here. There was a ball turret gunner, he sat down in here. There were 2 waist gunners, one on either side. And there was an engineer who sat up in the top turret, and a ball turret operator. I was the radio man, and I sat in this little place here, and my gun was right over my head. And we trained together in the United States until about the early part of 1944. In April of 1944, I arrived in England. We took a boat over. We were supposed to fly, but the weather was bad, so we had to take a boat. And in those days, of course, the Germans controlled the shipping in the Atlantic Ocean, over which we had passed. And there were a lot of submarines, and there were a lot of attacks, so that when we went over, we had to take a zigzag course. It took us 11 days to get from New York to Liverpool, England. When we were in England, we trained for a couple more weeks, and then on our first mission was on D-Day on June 6th of 1944. And this was, of course, a very special day because that was the day that the Allies invaded the continent of Europe. We had a ringside seat. We were flying that day, our first mission, and we were one of 12,000 airplanes that were in the air over the English Channel at one time or another. We could see the boats that were taking the troops from England over to France, and we could see them landing at the shore. And we could watch this whole thing. We weren't stationed, we weren't standing still, but we could see it as we flew over. So that was my first mission. After that, I flew 24 more missions with this crew up until the 25th mission. 25 times we flew over Europe to bomb the cities, to bomb the various targets. And what we usually tried to get were train stations where the railroad cars were kept, airports or airfields where the Germans had their fighters and their bombers, submarine pens where they hid their submarines, aircraft or munitions factories, ball bearing factories, anything that had to do with their war effort. And the unfortunate thing is that any time in war, as you know, even in Desert Storm or in Vietnam or any of the recent wars, that the civilians are always the innocent victims because they're caught in between. They have no part in this war. Maybe they weren't even in favor of it, but that's the way it works. When there is a war, civilians are killed, and this is one of the sad things about it. After our 25th mission, we were entitled to a vacation or a furlough, and this was on August 6th. We were supposed to get a 3-day pass or furlough to go to Scotland, which is a very beautiful country. It's in the British Isles, as you probably have studied, and we were really looking forward to it. Unfortunately, that morning of August 6th, I got a call that my furlough was canceled. They woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning because that was a very usual time for us to get up to go on a mission. We were in England, and the weather over there is not always the best. They have a lot of clouds, a lot of rain, a lot of fog, and so we had to plan well ahead to get up above this to form our formations and to get over Europe. But this particular morning, they told me that because they were short of radio operators, that I would have to fly. And so I got together with the rest of the new people that were on this crew. I didn't know any of them. We probably met somewhere along the way, but I didn't remember any of them. So we got into our airplane, got all our gear together, and took off for target. I should just go back one step here. Before we left, we all had a briefing. And a briefing is a period where the people that are planning this mission have a big map on the wall. And then they had first of all, they had a drape in front of it. So it was always a big surprise as to where you were going to go for that mission. And then they pulled this big drape back, And then they had a big ball of red yarn, and then they'd roll that out from England out to the place where you were going to go. And on the particular day that we were going to fly, we were going to Berlin, which was the capital of Germany, which is now again the capital after many years. But I had been there once before on my 9th mission, so I knew what it was, and it was no picnic, because they had all the German fighters, and they had the anti-aircraft guns, and they really used them, because this was where Hitler had his headquarters, and of course he wanted that protected as much as he could. What happened on this particular morning was that we got our gear together, we'd get in the airplane, and then we'd all take our turn to take off. There was a big tower in the middle of the airfield, just like you see up at Green Bay or over at Appleton. And in this tower, they regulated all the planes for taking off. Of course, this was always a busy place because there were a lot of airplanes and they didn't have much time to get us all up in the air. That's why we got up at 2 o'clock. We had to eat breakfast, we had to go through the briefing, we had to do all these other things, get all our gear together, and so that by sunrise we could take off. And the planes would take off in intervals like about every 45 seconds to 1 minute. And if something happened to a plane that he couldn't get his plane up off the ground, they'd have to push it off the runway and the next one would take off, because we had sometimes like 300 airplanes that flew out over this, on this particular mission. We would form over England, that is, we'd start going up in the air and we'd fly around and get all our planes in order. We always flew in a kind of a wedge formation at different altitudes. And then we got over the English Channel, which is the big water body, which has now got a tunnel underneath it, incidentally. And that'll be, if we ever have another war, that'll be a real sticker. But we flew over the English Channel, and then we went over France. And at that time, of course, France was still an occupied territory. That was one of the countries that Germany took over. France and Germany had always been at odds. They were always kind of having a little war among themselves. But after we got over France, we'd have to climb up to 33,000 feet because that was our bombing altitude. And if you can visualize 33,000 feet, it's about 6¼ miles. And that's a further distance than it is from here to Potter or from here to Reidsville. And that's straight up. So you can imagine how high. It took us a little while to get there, but once our airplane, the B-17, was a high altitude bomber. It was built just for that. And the reason they did that was so that you could try to get out of the range of the German guns, because first of all, when the war started, they didn't have guns that could shoot that high. But the Germans were smart people. They figured out a way to throw those shells up to 33,000 feet. And they threw them even beyond 33,000 feet sometimes. But I want to tell you a little bit about the B-17, which was also called the Flying Fortress. And I've got some pictures that you can look at after a while. The B-17 was a big airplane at that time. And if you see it on an airfield now, it's still as big, but there are other planes that are bigger. It had a wingspan, that is, the distance from the one wingtip to another was 104 feet. And if you can visualize this, you put 3 B-17s on your football field out here, which is 100 yards long. The wings, you put the planes on there side by side, and the wings would extend out over the end of the goal lines. That's how wide this plane was, the 3 planes. It was 75 feet long from here to here, and 19 feet from here to the top of the tail. And it had 13, the reason they called it the Flying Fortress was that it had 13 50 caliber machine guns. And you can see all these different ones. Most of them were turrets that were a little ball over your head, or this guy down here, he was really he just hung down there, but those guns would go all the way around. They'd go like 360 degrees, and then they could still go underneath. So we had a lot of firepower. We had capacity, our fuel tanks could hold enough fuel so that we could fly about 1,200 miles. Sometimes we were gone as long as the longest flight I think that I was ever on was 11 hours, which was down into France. And of course, when you have such a long day, you get hungry during the day, and they never really gave us any lunch. So what we would do is we would take some Milky Way or Mars bars, and we'd take them along, and then we put them on the outside, right on the inside of the plane, right against the aluminum wall. And these candy bars would freeze because even though if it was warm underground, it was like below zero up at 33,000 feet. So anything you put along the walls would freeze. Another thing that we had to wear, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the things that we wore, is an oxygen mask. Because when you go over 10,000 feet, your body needs oxygen. And so then after 10,000 feet, we had to wear this mask. And the planes nowadays, of course, are all pressurized from the inside, and you don't have that problem anymore. But I've got a picture over here to show you all the different things we had to strap on when we went. And you can see the helmet, the goggles, of course, and the headset for radio communications. There was a throat mic underneath there. The oxygen mask is a tube. And on the oxygen deal, we had what we call a central system. It went through the whole plane. And all you did is you plugged this connection right into the wall like you would on some of these new vacuum cleaners that we had. We also had underneath here, we had a heated suit. And that was kind of interesting. It was almost like an electric blanket, but it was made to fit over you. And we also had boots with wires in them, and we plugged that in because, like I said, at 30,000 feet, the weather is very cold. The temperature is very cold. We had a harness, a parachute harness. First of all, when they first started flying, they had what they called a backpack. That was a harness, and then the parachute was on the back. By the time we flew, they came out with a little better idea. It was called a chest pack. And what it was, you wore the harness, and it had two big hooks on it. And you could put this chest pack on the floor, and then when you needed it, you just picked it up, snapped it on, and it was ready. So you didn't have to carry it around all the time. If we ever walked away from our central connection on the oxygen system, we'd have to use a walk-around bottle, which was just a little bottle like you've probably seen some people in wheelchairs or hospitals use. And that gave us enough oxygen then to get around until we got back to the central system. On the particular day that we were flying to Berlin, it was a real nice sunny August afternoon. But the sky was getting pretty black where we were going because of the flak. And flak is another word for anti-aircraft fire. These were the shells that the Germans would throw up. And they had two different kinds of guns. They had 88 millimeter and 105. And these were big guns. They had barrels on them probably 12, 15 feet long. They throw this stuff up at us. And this is a picture, shows a little bit of it. But as we got closer to the target, this got more intense. And flak, when it explodes, shell comes up into the air and bursts, and there's a big red ball. And then all these little fragments come out at a terrific speed. As you probably heard in the Oklahoma City incident, that there were a lot of people that had pieces of from the explosive in their skin and in their bodies. And this is, of course, what kills people. If this shrapnel or this flak hit you, it would tear the meat right off your bones, it would break your bones, and of course, if it hit you in a bad spot, it would kill you. And it would also tear up the airplane. Again, the B-17 was a very well-built airplane. It was tough. It could stand a lot of abuse. And there were a lot of planes that came back from a mission where they came back on one engine. The 17 had 4 engines, but sometimes something happened to 3 of them, and it could fly on one engine. Sometimes the whole big part of the rudder would be torn off, or the nose would be blown off, or the wings, for example. One time they counted a plane that had 300 holes in it, but it still could fly. But on the particular day that we were flying, things didn't quite work out that night. We got to our target, which was, like I said, Berlin, about noon, right about noon. And the Germans were out there with their fighter planes, and they were throwing the flak at us, and pretty soon they did hit one of our engines. It was the number 3 engine. And on a 17 or any plane, you count this way. You count from the right-hand side. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this was the second engine, or the one right alongside the fuselage. And what happened, of course, is that the engine didn't work, and it started on fire. So the fire started coming along the side here, and also coming into the plane. And when this happens, of course, you start losing a little altitude, and we lost our place in the formation. Then they hit us with another shell, and that hit another engine on the 17. So now we were only on 2 engines. So we dropped our bombs before we ever got to the target, And then, of course, we fell behind. And when you fell behind the formation, when you were by yourself, you were either called a cripple or a straggler. And then the German fighters would take advantage of that. And then they'd come in, of course, and they'd shoot you up. And this is what happened to us. So usually when you get into trouble like that, the pilot is the captain. He runs the ship. He's just like a captain on any ship. He's the guy that gives the orders. And usually he would decide if you had to bail out to get out of that airplane, he'd give the command. But we never heard it because evidently our radio system was shot out, so we didn't ever find out of it. He didn't ever get to tell us. But we knew that we had to get out because you had two choices. Either get out or die in the airplane. You'd either die in it from the fire or die in it when it crashed. So we had to get out. We ran into more trouble. By this time, the inside of the airplane is getting pretty smoky, and everybody is very into a panic situation and falling over each other and everything. And we're trying to get out of a little door back here, which was called the escape hatch. Unfortunately, something happened to the door, the hinges on that door, and it wouldn't open. It was supposed to be a deal where you pull two pins, just push the door out. That's the way it was supposed to work. This didn't work that day. Nothing seemed to work. So we had to go back to another little door back here that the tail gunner would use. And so we had to find our way back through this smoke-filled airplane in the back. There's a lot of mechanism back there, but we did crawl out, and all 6 of us got out of that airplane through that opening. The other 4 people used the hatch up in the front where they jumped out through the bomb bay. And of course, we didn't know what had happened to them. In fact, I didn't know what happened to these, to the officers and the upper turret gunner until last year. I finally got a report from the people that keep records, and they said that 2 officers were killed and that the other 3 people were also prisoners of war. So after we got out of the airplane, then of course your next concern is my parachute going to open? In the meantime, we had to put this parachute on, of course, before we got out of the airplane. The parachute is a little bundle, like I said, it's about the size of a baby, and it has a red handle on it. And when we were in training, we never got to jump to really experience what a parachute jump was like. But they told us how to use it and everything else, and they said the best thing to remember is to pull the red handle. So when we jumped out, they also told us to delay pulling that handle as long as you could, because if you were pulled it too soon and you slowed it down, sometimes the German pilots came along and they'd shoot at you. So I tried to remember that, and pretty soon I felt like I was blacking out or passing out. So I pulled the cord, and this was one of the most beautiful sights I ever saw. First of all, there's a little pilot chute that pops out at the top. It's like one of these, we used to make them as kids. You throw them up in the air and there's a little handkerchief or something like that and you throw it down. This pops out, and that in turn pulls out the big chute. Now when that happens, when the big chute comes out, you get a terrific jolt, because most of the time you're not in a vertical position like this. You're either, and when you free fall, it's amazing what you can do. You see people that skydive, and it's really something. But when that parachute opens, that straightens you out in a real big hurry. And so then this big, beautiful 30 feet of silk, white silk, floats over the top. And then you're just gradually let down to earth. And then, of course, you got a lot of time to think. I don't really know at what elevation or what height that I pulled the cord. But it seemed like a long time, and I could see what was going on down there. It was a beautiful sunny day, and it gives you, they always say your past passes in front of you, but I can't really remember all the things that I thought about. My big concern was what's going to happen now. So pretty soon you're down to 10, down to 5, and after you get under 5,000 feet, any of you who have flown in a civilian airplane know that how much larger things get as you get closer to the ground. And it seems like the last 5,000 feet go faster than any other 5,000 feet. When I came down or came toward the ground, I noticed that there would probably be about 3 different choices that I had. I could land in a small village with an electrical plant next to a lake. None of these places were particularly ones that I would enjoy getting caught in, but I pulled on the cords. They taught us this, that you could kind of move the chute around a little bit if you pulled on the cords. But they also told us that if you pulled too hard on one of the cords, you could dump the chute, and then it would be like not having any chute at all. So I tried this, and I fooled around, and I said, hey, let's let well enough alone. I'll take my chances. As I got closer and closer, I could see the Germans that were on the ground watching, ready. They were waiting, because I wasn't the only one coming down. Of course, all the guys from our plane and a lot of other planes. There's a picture, I don't think I brought it. Yeah, here it is. It shows one of the planes going down. A lot of other airplanes were shot down that same day. Each plane was for 10 people. So if you figured 50 airplanes, 500 people. Maybe there weren't that many shot down. I really don't know. But anyhow, as I got closer, I noticed that I was going to go into a lake. So one of the things they told us that you should use a life preserver. You should put this on too after you get into the airplane. But we always said, only when you go over water. That's the only time you ever need a life preserver. Well, I didn't know I was going to go over water because the lake that I landed in was not a big lake. It probably was a long lake, maybe a little smaller than a long lake. But I landed in this lake, and it was fortunate because a lot of the other people that bailed out, a lot of the other crew members would hit trees, and they'd break legs or arms or something like that, or get hung up. They'd fall on top of houses, and of course they'd break bones and everything else. And if you hit the ground, of course, that might be very bad as well. But falling into water from an airplane was not too bad. It's like sitting in a big chair. But you have to remember you're going to go down, and then you're going to come back up. And with a parachute over your head, you have to be careful. Otherwise, the parachute will land over the top of you and you'll choke. Not from the water, but because you can't get in the air. Fortunately, the parachute landed next to me. And by this time, of course, the Germans started to come out in a boat. There were 6 of them in a boat. And these were not soldiers or anything, but they were like our civil defense. They were called Volksturm. And they came out, and I was in the water, and I wasn't thinking about what they might have in the boat. I figured, well, they may have guns or something like that. But they had pitchforks and knives. And one of them, as I was not a good swimmer, but I managed to keep afloat. And at that time, I used one of the things that I learned as a child, and that was how to speak German. And of course, when I started talking to them in German, they were shocked, because they didn't think any American could speak German. So I gave them my best sales pitch and asked them if they wouldn't take me into the boat, which they did. But like I said, they had pitchforks, and there was one guy, he kept poking around down there, and I'd swim away from him, and I'd come back. He wasn't too happy about me, but the other 5 of them overruled him, and so they put me in the boat. Then we got to the shore, and I always said there was a welcoming party there. Now, this was not anything with balloons and cheering or anything like that. These people were very angry. And you can't blame them, because here we are coming over their houses at high noon on a Sunday and bombing their people, bombing their factories, bombing their houses. And now they caught one of these guys that's responsible for that. So first of all, what they did was they searched me. One thing I didn't mention before, that along with all this other stuff, we each had a .45 caliber pistol. And we were given this so that when we, in the event we were captured, that we could defend ourselves. But again, when I was in training, I never got to be a good shot with that .45. We used to fool around with it, but I never did master it. But anyhow, I threw it away on the way down because I figured it would cause me more harm than good. And when I landed, and when they got me on shore, they searched me and they couldn't find this gun. And they thought, now that's something, this guy could be a spy. He talks German, he doesn't have a gun. Something could be very funny about this. But eventually they decided that I was just a flyer and that I wasn't there for any special purpose. So they, after I dried out on the beach a little while, they let me put my clothes back on. And of course, you have to remember, with all this stuff that we had on, this was all water soaked and everything, so I was still a little bit wet. And one of the things that I remember that was a real problem, we also wore flying boots. Sometimes, if you've maybe seen it in an Army surplus store, I don't know if they still have them or not. These were fleece-lined big boots. They were not made to walk in. They were only made for you to keep your feet warm while you were sitting or standing still. And I think that probably a lot of deer hunters still use them once in a while for standing. But anyhow, these are big boots. And we didn't have any shoes on underneath here. We just had those little heated booties, you might call them. And of course, they took away the heated suit and everything, so all we had was left was our coveralls that we had, and they let me keep my flying boots. So they put me in a smokehouse. This was the first prison I was in, and that was the only place that had a lock on it probably. So this is where they put me for the time being. Now I have to look at the notes because first I got to see how much longer I have to talk, and then how fast I have to talk.
25, 30 minutes.
Okay. After I was in the smokehouse for a while, pretty soon, and in the meantime, they had called the military, and a soldier came, a German soldier came with a bicycle, on a bicycle. Germans traveled a lot on bicycles. And he came and took me out of this smokehouse, and then I had to walk in front of him. I pushed the bicycle, and he walked behind me with his rifle in my back. We walked around this lake, and we were going around it, there was a guy swimming in the lake. And this guy evidently did not like what the Americans were doing over in Italy. And so he tried to get at me, and it was the only defense I had was pushing this bicycle between him and me all the time. And then finally the guard told him to bug off, and he went back to the lake. But after this, we went through a whole series of different small places where we gradually got more and more prisoners together. And I met some of the same guys that were on my crew. And pretty soon we had like first 35, then 100, and then maybe 200 people that they had captured that day or the days before or days before that. So then they took us and put us in a boxcar, and they shipped us to a station where they processed all the prisoners of war. And at this place, they put you into solitary confinement. That is, they tried to ask you all kinds of questions to find out things about what you did, where your airplane came from, how many more airplanes were there, what your target was, all that kind of stuff. And if they didn't get their answers right away, they put you back into this prison cell. And the cell was really, you've probably seen it in the movies, it was a real bare place that had just had one window in it, and that was frosted. You couldn't look out of it. It had like a cot in it, but it was pretty sad for a cot the way you knew it. It was just a bed made out of boards, and then they had the mattresses were made out of wood shavings, and we found out after a while that this was a common thing in life. But I was in this solitary confinement for a couple of days, and then they finally figured, I suppose, that I didn't know too much, or they didn't get what they wanted to know. So then we were sent to another camp where we got a shower, and we got some food, and we got some clothes. They didn't always give us American uniforms. Sometimes we had British parts from a British uniform. I had a French overcoat. All these things. It was like toothbrush, shaving kit, things like that. Then we were sent to our first prison camp. This was not too far from where we were processed. It was way down in the corner of France and southern France and Germany meet. We were there only for 3 weeks. Then they put us on boxcars, and we were shipped all the way across Germany. The place where I was, the last prison camp I was down here, and then they shipped us all the way over to the other end of Germany. This was a 5-day, 5-night trip. It was a real bear. We didn't have much to eat, and the facilities were very cramped, and of course the toilet facilities, I don't want to even talk about that too much because it was bad. When we got to our camp, which was way up on the Baltic Sea up here in almost right next to the free city of Danzig was the closest large city that was up there. It was on the Baltic Sea. And this was Stalag Luft number 4. And some of the pictures that I have here show what these particular, what it was like to be in this prison camp. The barracks were pretty simple. It was a long building. It had, I forgot now, I think it had 10 rooms in it. There was a center hall down the middle, and each room had about 20 or 25 prisoners in it. We had one little window on the side, and this picture shows the early stages. After a while, they put these barracks on posts. The reasons they did that is because the prisoners figured out ways to escape. They would dig tunnels. They'd dig down 10, 15, 20 feet, and then they'd dig a tunnel out to the outside to where they could get outside the fence. And then they would try to escape from there. And there have been books written, there have been movies made, and you probably have seen some of them. The schedule or the routine, more or less, during the day was that these doors were locked, of course, during the night. You couldn't get out. And at 7:30 in the morning, they'd open the doors, and then we'd get our. I have to tell you about our food, because when I asked Aaron, what do you people like to hear? He said, tell us about what you had to eat. Well, you had to get used to a whole new diet. The first thing that we ran into along the way was the German coffee. They call it coffee, but it was a far cry from anything that resembled our coffee. One of the guys that described it probably said it very well, and he said, it smelled like a wet dog and it tasted worse. They also had tea, and I don't know, we never drank any of that, but they said it was made out of marsh hay that they let ferment. So all this stuff, we really don't know what was in it. And the main thing that we got to eat was black bread and potatoes. Black bread, if you go to a baker shop and you get dark rye or something like that, it doesn't taste too bad. But this stuff was something else. Again, we don't know what was in it, but all I can remember is there was a lot of sawdust around the outside, and the stuff was real spongy, and it was sour, and it would get hard real fast. That is, if you didn't eat it within the first day or two, the stuff would get almost like a stone. And we used to have kind of a joke. The guys had a sign on the wall, and then they had all the tools that you needed to cut this bread. One of them was a chisel, and another one was a saw, and a guy with a hammer. But this was our basic food, and then we would get, they had, the loaves probably were this long, but we would have to split that with, for 7 people, which amounted to a piece of bread about like an inch and a half thick. And then we would try to cut that in smaller pieces so it would last longer. We would get an average of 3 potatoes a day. That was the main course, the main meal. And these were potatoes usually boiled. Boiled with the skins on, boiled with the straw on, boiled with the dirt on, whatever came with it, they just boiled it and we got it. And we did it, the main thing that we missed over there was salt. If you've ever tried, they tell me, of course, after you get a little older, you're not supposed to eat so much salt, but if you've ever tried eating something that doesn't have salt in it, it tastes, it very much tastes to it. In addition to these, the bread and the potatoes, we would sometimes get some margarine to put on the bread. We also, one time, we really got a surprise. The Germans gave us 20 pounds of cheese. And we thought, boy, isn't this a good deal? But what they didn't tell us, this was spread among 200 men. So when by the time everybody got a little piece of that, there wasn't really much. After a while, we figured out a way that one time, one room would get it, the next time another room would get it, so we'd each at least have a little different taste. There were other things they gave us, like dehydrated vegetables. I don't know, a lot of times we didn't know what it was. They had a lot of kohlrabis, they had a lot of turnips, a lot of root crops in addition to the potatoes. Sometimes we got some marmalade, and again, this was artificial. The German word was Ersatz, or a substitute. And this stuff was, like I remember the jam, it had a real taste on it. It was almost like eating popcorn. The more you used, the more you wanted of it. And of course, it wasn't that great. But after we left the camp, I'll talk a little bit about that yet, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about some of the things we had to eat. But in this particular camp, like I said, I was there from September 15th to about May 2nd. And in this, I don't have a picture here, but in the corners of this, the compound was real big. I might mention it was divided into 4 separate areas. There were 10,000 prisoners, 2,500 in each section, and on each corner of this particular compound was a guard tower. And this guard tower was manned by 2 German guards. Of course, they had machine guns up there as well as rifles. And if you got out of order, of course, they used it. Around this whole compound were 2 fences. The outer fence, each fence was 10 feet high. Barbed wire on the top, and then a barbed wire coil in between, and then another 10-foot high fence. And then inside of this 30 feet to the inside, where we walked around, was a warning rail. And we were not allowed to touch that or to try to cross it, because then the guards would open fire. Well, during the months of September and October, the weather was just like it is here in Wisconsin. It wasn't too bad. It got a little cool once in a while, but not too bad. But in November, of course, it started to snow and got colder. So we couldn't be outside as much anymore. And then, of course, we had to figure out what to do inside. We got the thing that kept us alive as far as food was concerned were Red Cross parcels. These were parcels that were made up in the United States and then shipped to Switzerland or to Sweden, neutral countries, who in turn got it into Germany. We were supposed to get one of these parcels a week, but unfortunately that didn't work out. We only got a quarter of one. But it still helped us to keep us alive. There was variety. In these parcels, some of the things that were in there were powdered milk. That was probably one of the things that we really appreciated. There was crackers in there. Sometimes we had corned beef. Sometimes there was Spam in it. We had jam in there. There were margarine, crackers, like I said, vitamin pills that put in there, a chocolate bar. Let's see, cigarettes at that time, of course, were very popular. And a few other items that we wouldn't get from the Germans. But we used that. Also salmon, I remember, that was in there. But what the Germans did, they punctured all the cans. Anything that was in a can, like the milk, the margarine, the jam, the meat, everything, they punctured all those cans before they gave it to us. And they said the reason they did this was to prevent us from gathering this stuff together when we were going to escape. Well, where were we going to go? There was no place to go. But that was the way they had set it up. So we had to eat this stuff pretty fast after we got it, which was really no problem. We were in this camp, like I said, one other thing I want to mention is the YMCA. I give the Red Cross a lot of credit for keeping us alive. The YMCA, which never got a lot of publicity on this whole thing, did some things that also made our life a lot more pleasant. They sent over games and books like dominoes, cards. They even sent over musical instruments. And we formed a band in our group, and they sent all kinds of things. We made a library and things like that. So that, and sports equipment, we had volleyball, and we even had a baseball team or a softball team, things like that. So the YMCA is largely responsible for that. When it got after Christmas, things started to get a little nervous around. You could tell the Germans were getting a little, they were kind of on edge all the time. And pretty soon we heard rumors that the Russians were coming. And this was not just a joke, this was for real. The Russians, of course, were coming from the east, and the Allies were coming from the west. And this whole thing started to move together. And pretty soon, the Russians were within 50 miles of our camp. And we said, ah, boy, now we're going to get liberated. The reason we knew this, we had a secret radio. The British, actually, there were some British soldiers in our compound, and they built a radio. So they knew what was going on. And the Germans would give us their newspapers, and I could read the German paper. I could make out at least what was going on. So we knew the Russians were getting pretty close. In fact, one night some of the guys said they stood by the door and they could hear the guns, big guns that were being used. And so by the beginning of February, we knew that something was going to happen. On the night of the 5th of February, the commandant of the camp came into every barracks and he said, tomorrow morning we're going to be leaving. You guys get your act together, get all your stuff that you're going to take, and be ready to march out of here tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. So, well, we didn't have a lot to begin with, but we took our blankets and any food we had and any extra clothes we had, anything we had that we could carry on our backs, and we marched out of this camp. It was really like a bunch of tramps walking down the road. After a couple of days, of course, we'd been shaved. We didn't have a bath for a long time. The first while when we were marching, it wasn't too bad because we were still in reasonably good shape. The people were not too bad because they weren't bombed yet over in this area where we were way up in the northeast corner. So they were more curious than anything else. But as we got closer down into we were marching up along the Baltic Sea here, and as we got closer to areas that had been bombed, the people got a little more vicious. And pretty soon we were attacked by the Hitler Youth, the younger people. They were the worst. They threw bottles at us and sticks, and of course if they had guns they would have shot at us. But the guards protected us, and we marched. We marched for 86 days. Somebody figured it out by the time we probably covered between 600 and 700 miles. And this was, of course, not under the most pleasant conditions. We had a lot of bad weather, just like they do in Wisconsin again, a lot of snow, a lot of cold days and everything. But we had to sleep outside a lot of times. Most of the times we slept in barns. The Germans, and then they'd split us up so that we could sleep in a barn. Not on a bunch of hay or anything like that, but on the ground. And they would really jam us in there. And of course, the night if somebody there were no lights in there, and the guards were at the doors. And if somebody had to get up and go to the bathroom at night, you had to crawl over 20 or 25 guys, and then try to crawl over 24 more guys going back in. So it was excuse me, I'm going to change this tape because I like to record it here. It was a real testing experience, and a lot of the guys, because by this time now we were getting to wear down pretty badly. A lot of the people were getting sick. There was a lot of frostbite because they didn't have good shoes. I was lucky; I had a good pair of shoes, but there was a lot of pneumonia. There were a lot of different diseases that developed, and as long as you could walk, you had to walk. There were no doctor or no medication for simple things like blisters or anything like that. If you did get very seriously ill, they'd pull you off and take you to a hospital. That's what we were told anyhow. I never talked to anybody that was in a hospital. But we did go through this for 86 days. We stopped at different places, and I just have to mention one thing. While it was a very, very sad time, the Americans always had a good sense of humor. And we would try to make the Germans pay whenever we could. Sometimes they'd always threaten us with cutting off our food, but when you subtract something from nothing, you have nothing. So we figured we had nothing to lose. But we would pull different tricks on them once in a while. In this Red Cross parcel, there was one thing I didn't mention was powdered coffee. I think this was probably the beginning of instant coffee, but anyhow, it was a little can with American coffee. And the Germans, they would give anything to get that coffee because they didn't have any real good coffee. So what we would do, we would dump this out into another container and then grind up a bunch of bricks. Fill this can up about 3/4 or 7/8 of the way with bricks, and then sprinkle a little coffee on top. And then we would trade that to them as if it was a full can of coffee. Of course, by the time they figured it out, we figured we'd be long gone again, so we didn't have to answer to anybody. One time we were in a farmer's yard, and the farmer said, I just pruned my orchard. If you guys want to make fires to cook your food out there, that's all right. But we also noticed that he had a nice wood pile right next to his house. And the Germans piled their wood like in a big round, like a cylinder. By the time we left there, the only wood that was left was the wood that was facing his house. The rest of it was all used up. We didn't use the brush, we used the wood. They had it. So this, like I said, went on for 86 days. We finally came back. I have to tell you about the Day of Liberation. And this was this happened. Well, it happened 50 years ago, but it happened on May 2nd. So this year I celebrated 50 years of liberation. We were getting ready to march again, but again the Germans were confused. They didn't know by this time where to send us anymore. So then we were at this farmyard, and we were around a manure pile of all things. And I always said, wouldn't this have been a real place for CNN to bring in their big team of photographers and to show what kind of a situation this was? The British airborne unit had sent in a personnel carrier. And the Germans knew he was coming, and the captain went out and he gave up his pistol. That was the sign of surrender. We took the Germans' guns and broke them around trees, and we hugged each other, and we cried because we were all just so happy because it was all over. After that, it was just a series. We had we didn't get back to the American lines right away. We went through the British and some other Allied camps. And we went to a camp called Lucky Strike, which was designed to process all the prisoners of war. Incidentally, there were 94,000 prisoners of war during World War II. They weren't all in Europe. There were a lot of them in the Pacific. And of course, those stories are even a little wilder than anything I could tell. But we got back to Camp Lucky Strike where they processed us, and General Eisenhower arranged so that we could get home as fast as we could. It only took us 5 days to come back home. It took us 11 days to go to Europe, but it only took us 5 days because we didn't have to worry about German submarines or anything else. I got home, and one of the most beautiful scenes I think that you could ever see for anybody is when you go past the Statue of Liberty, particularly this time, because we realize now that we were home again and that we could enjoy the freedom that we have been fighting for. I wanted to mention just one other thing. Like you, I went to parochial school for 8 years. And I know a lot of times I thought, why am I don't like school, all that kind of stuff. But let me just tell you one thing. I hope that none of this, what I'm talking about, ever happens to you. But if you can fall back on what you learned here in school, your faith in God and in Jesus, and your ability to pray and to find hope in your faith, that was very important. Because I said if it hadn't been for that, I don't think a lot of us would have survived. So it's with that thought that I leave you, that I hope you people are never subjected to anything like I experienced, and that you'll do everything to prevent that from happening again. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience, and if you have any questions, I will try to answer. Yes, anybody?
You ever get shot?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
You get shot?
Did I get shot? No, I only got burned. What happened was I had to jump through the planes that were on the side of the fuselage, and I was still wearing my oxygen mask, so I breathed in a lot of this hot air, and then I did have burns on one side of my face. When I landed in the water, a German woman came out, was on the shore, and she came out of her house onto the shore, and she said, "You dirty American, why don't you wash your face?" And I rubbed my hand over my face, and of course all the skin came off. But that was the only injury I had.
Oh, okay.
Nobody in our plane ever got shot, except the 2 people who were killed. I don't know what happened. Somebody else? Yes?
Death camp? Death camp. What do you guys, what is your question? He wants to know if you were near any of the death camps?
No, we never, actually we didn't get into any of the concentration camps. I went to one of these after we came home. We went back to Europe, and they had a museum where they had one of the camps. But no, I was never in a concentration camp. The closest we came was to an international camp. And this was for all different nationalities. It wasn't like a concentration camp, but it was the next thing to it, I guess, because there were like thousands and thousands of these different nationalities. And they were all in this, and it was, they had lived in tents, and they lived in, in real squalor. They went through garbage cans to find something to eat. They had like 4 water faucets for 1,000 people. They never got a chance to take a bath, and they were just like animals. But that was as close as we ever got to them. I was glad to get out of there. Yes?
How were you captured?
When I bailed out of the airplane and I landed in the water, the Germans came out in this boat. And they captured me. They took me into the boat, and they held me prisoner and took me to the shore. And then they searched me, and then the German army came, and then they took me into their control as a prisoner of war. Yes?
When you were in prison, did you think you were going to get out?
That was a good question. A lot of times the thought ran through your mind, what happens if I don't get out? But like I said, you'd have to pray and you'd have to hope, because that was the only thing you had to live for. I have here one of the samples of the letters that I wrote home. We were allowed to write 2 letters a month, but you had to be, in order to get mail, you had to be a prisoner for a year. So I never heard from anybody for a whole year. I never got a letter or anything from my people back home. I did find out, this was kind of interesting, somebody tried to send me a package over in Germany. It took so long, it would take a letter 4 months to get over to the prison camp. But this particular package was sent from Brillion to England, no, from Brillion to Germany, and from Germany to England, and then from England to the United States. When I got home, they saved the box. It came home before I did. When they got the box, we opened it up. There were cookies in there, and there were fur on the cookies about 1/4 of an inch high. Well preserved. Okay, yes?
Did you lose quite a bit of weight?
Did we lose weight?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were on a real diet over there. It was Hitler's weight control program, we called it. Because we didn't have a lot of food to begin with, and because we were real short on certain vitamins, you lose weight. Your body starts to lose weight. Yes, we all lost weight. I figured that when I got out of the prison, I went in at about 175 or maybe 180, and I came out like 110. And I was not the worst. There were some that were a lot less. Yes? I didn't get very sick, no, but a lot of the guys did, because their health was not that good. Great. Yes?
Did you see anybody getting killed?
We saw people that, and this is not very pleasant to talk about, because anytime that you see some of your own people that are killed, yes, I saw some hanging. When we went through Berlin, we were marched through Berlin on one of these times that we were on the road, not on the road, but being transported. And I saw 2 Americans and 2 British soldiers that were hanging in trees. We saw a lot of bodies on the road right after the war, a lot of German bodies. We didn't see them killed, of course. A lot of dead animals, things like that. But no, I never saw anybody get shot. Anybody else? Now somebody had their hand up. Yeah.
Did you ever see Hitler?
No, and I wasn't really looking forward to seeing him. But no, I didn't see him, and I don't know how many prisoners might have, because he pretty much, toward the end of the war, he kept himself pretty well isolated, because he was afraid that somebody, they tried to assassinate him one time, and that didn't work. So he wasn't too, didn't come out and meet the people too much. He stayed around pretty much where he was in control right near his bunker after a while. Yes?
Did you see any prisoners escape, or did any of them escape while you were in prison?
No, when I was a prisoner, there were a couple that tried to escape on the march, that is, while we were marching. And they came back within a few days and said, forget it, you can't get anywhere, and there's nothing out there anyhow, we might as well wait till we were liberated. In fact, we got, over the radio, we heard, the Americans, of course, were getting closer, and they were broadcasting messages that said, don't try to escape, because it won't be too long and you'll be liberated. Because don't jeopardize your life. You've been through it this long, you made it this far, sweat it out for a couple more weeks or months, we'll get through sooner. Yes?
Do you consider yourself a miracle?
I consider my life being saved as a miracle, yes, because when I think about how many other people that were in the same situation that I was, for example, number one, I was shot at, but I wasn't hit. We were on fire and I was not burned inside the plane. We jumped out of the airplane and my parachute opened. I landed in a lake. I didn't have any broken bones. They captured me. They didn't shoot me. I was sent to a prison camp. I survived all the prison life. I managed to get by on the food that they gave me. I didn't have any bad diseases. And the grateful thing that I'm thankful for is the fact that I still have good health. Because a lot of the people that were on this march contracted all different kinds of diseases and problems, psychological and otherwise, and they're in nursing homes or in hospitals. I'm still a very able-bodied, healthy person. Thank you for asking. you're invited to come up and look. I'm going to leave these things here for you while you have your lunch. And Aaron asked me to bring these along. I don't always display these, but I just wanted to tell you, these are the medals that we got while we were, after we were liberated. There's a picture of my crew here, about the other guys on there. The one I'm proudest, of course, is of the Purple Heart, which you have for injuries, the Air Medal, which you get for flying so many missions, and then all the other things. These are the wings up here that we were wearing. And this is the 8th Air Force. That's the Air Force that we belong to. This is a patch from the prison camp that I was at. One thing is missing here, and I'm scrounging my basement and my closets and everything else trying to find it, and that's the prisoner of war dog tag that I had. When we were prisoners, when you get into the service, you each get 2 dog tags, 2 United States dog tags. The Germans took one, and then they gave me a German prisoner of war medal, German dog tag, which is a real, it's so homemade that it's worth saving. But my prisoner number was 4142, so I don't know what that meant, but that's the way we were recorded in the books. And one thing I'll never forget is my dog tag number, and that's 368065337. And whenever they ask me for all these other numbers, like your social security number, I can't remember those, but I always remember that one. Thanks again for being a good audience.
Thank you.